Hi, welcome to the Israel First television program with myself, Martin Blackham. Great to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us today with a program that looks at Israel. We look at the news, we look at features, and we look behind the news. And today I'm looking particularly at a story I picked up. This is the I-24 news, and there's a picture of the Pope with some rabbis and meeting different Jewish people. He's going to be organizing a special school at the Hebrew University. And so very exciting, the developments, Catholic-Jewish relations, and of course it's always in the news here in Israel. And we even had, of course, the Pope coming to Israel to visit. So to talk to me about this story and about his latest book, The Sistine Secrets, Michelangelo's Forbidden Messages. Actually, I just thought it might not be your latest book, but the book that you've written, Roy. We have Roy Doliner in the studio today. Thank you so much for coming across today.
My pleasure.
Brilliant to have you with us.
My pleasure.
Very exciting. You're going to be not going to want to miss any of this program. We're going to talk about the Sistine Secrets, going to be talking about codes and all sorts of things, and Christian Jewish relations, Catholic Jewish relations. So thank you so much for coming today, Roy.
My pleasure.
Maybe you can tell us a bit about your background, because you're originally from New York. I think it's Brooklyn that is your home originally. So maybe you can tell us a bit about how you came to move from there to Rome, bearing in mind the relationship between Catholics and Jews hasn't been very good over the centuries, and we've had this is a book called Unholy War, and it talks about that, the difficulties in the Jewish-Catholic relations. It was originally the Catholics that put the Jewish people into ghettos and the Star of David, and I understand that even Hitler was originally a Catholic. So bearing in mind all of the background, how did you end up moving from New York, from the Jewish places that you were, to be in a very different environments?
Well, it wasn't that different because I was not born into a religious family, so I was born in the Italian area. So Italian I picked up out of the air as a kid, and I was more comfortable going with all my Catholic friends to church on Sundays, and I felt more surrounded by friends there than I did in synagogue. And I'm what's called in Hebrew Baal Teshuvah, which is somebody who becomes religious later on in life. So I tell people...
Is that typical of Jewish people in New York? That a lot of them are... there's a word, isn't there, that where they mix into the society.
Assimilated?
Yeah, there's a lot of us, not assimilated, but they're people who would join in society and not be so Jewish.
Well, it's very prevalent in the United States. Really, in the United States, it's the majority of Jews. I think 20% are Orthodox, or what you would call traditional Torah Jews. But even in the very, very religious and Hasidic areas, everybody is used to mixing with the general society. There's an old proverb we have that I love. It says, be in the world, but not of the world. It's sort of like the Jewish version of render unto Caesar. So that you have to be part of the world around you. You can't lock yourself into a little bubble. And it was no problem for me. I told people that my move from New York City to Italy was I moved from Italians and Jews to Italians and Jews. There was just the language was more prevalent in Italian when I moved.
Right. So you moved from New York, where you'd lived, and moved to Rome, and then you became involved with the Vatican. I understand that was that before the book?
Yes, that was before the book. I was asked to guide around important Jewish visitors to Rome because I was mother tongue English, and because I love religious history and art history and architectural history. European history, Jewish history, so Christian history. So and also I was the only one who didn't have a clothing store to take care of in Rome, so out of the Jewish community. So I was picked, and I took around a few rabbis and showed them things around Rome. And pretty soon, I'm going to teach you an ancient proverb in Latin. Telegramma, telephone, telejew. Guess which one is the fastest? Yeah. So I took around a few rabbis, and that was it. I was deluged with people from all over the world, from all religious backgrounds. Everybody wanted to take tours. I got myself registered, set up a cultural association specializing in all the Jewish information of Rome. And we were very happily surprised to have so many Christian visitors choosing my group. And I took around Vice President Biden's family. The White House called me to take them around. And we met at the Vatican, and they saw my kippah, and they were very surprised. I said, I'm your official Vatican guide. And we all had a good laugh. And I asked them, I said, the man who coordinated this for the vice president's family, I said, why did you choose me and not one of the Catholic guides in the Vatican? And he said, the family wanted to know 100% of the history, not 50% of the history. Wow. And we heard that many times.
And maybe our audience don't know, maybe at home you don't realize, but there was of course, a big Jewish community. I guess there still is in Rome today, and there was the exile of the Jewish people into Italy. So there's already those people there. So maybe it would be good to talk about the book, The Sistine Secrets, Michelangelo's Forbidden Messages at the Heart of the Vatican. First of all, how can they get this book, Roy? They tune into the program and they'd say, I want this book.
And you're all going to buy the book, I know. It's very easy. Amazon has it, also in all their different country settings. And also it's available it was available in about 16 different languages. But it's completely sold out in France, completely sold out in South Korea, completely sold out in Russia. Maybe in a secondhand store you ask somebody to go there and scour the town to find it. But in English it's very available online.
And it's a New York Times bestseller, and I know that you're going to really enjoy the book, because for a lot of our audience, they'll be very interested to know about the Jewish-Christian relations and the secrets that you found. So you're a tour guide showing people around the Vatican and the Sistine Chapel, hence the title of the book, The Sistine Secrets. So how was it that you discovered that in this Christian, the Renaissance, all these beautiful paintings, there were anything Jewish in them? That's fascinating.
Well, at first I kept my big mouth shut because I thought my imagination was getting the best of me. I didn't tell anybody for several years, and while I was doing all the research and finding out all these things, the Vatican gave me a very big honor. I was very moved. I'm the very first religious Jew to be an authorized docent in the Vatican. Authorized by the Vatican itself.
That's a tour, the person who would be officially taking people, the tour guide.
Any part of Vatican City that was, accessible to the public. So it was a big honor, and of course I had to make sure that I was 100% accurate about everything I said and 200% respectful about everything I said.
So there you are. You've been appointed as a docent, the official tour guide for the Vatican, and you start to see things. Did you write them down, or?
I was making notes for myself. You see, my background in art history is very strange. It's all, as we say, min shamayim, from heaven. That in the United States, what I did to put food on the table, I was an interpreter for the hearing impaired. That's one of my second languages. So I'm fluent in sign language, for American Sign Language. And that teaches you nonverbal communication. I became the go-to interpreter for all the top universities in New York City for several years for art history classes. And if you're an interpreter for art history, you have to become the artwork. So it's a boot camp in automatic analysis of an artwork. And you have to immediately dive into it to make it accessible for non-hearing people. So once I started...
So you have to use you have to use the hand symbols to explain the art.
That, but it's also, if you're talking about the Mona Lisa, you have to become the Mona Lisa. The Last Supper, you have to become all the people at the table in the Last Supper. So it's very intense training. I could have, if I had been a student, I could have had my degree in art history 5 different times from all the top universities in New York, but I was the interpreter. So it was fantastic for learning everything in art history and for analytical purposes. At the same time, I was becoming more and more religious, studying Jewish wisdom literature and the Bible, the Torah, all of that. And I started guiding in the Sistine. And I was very lucky because I would do VIP tours, which are in the evening. So I had plenty of time while the people were strolling around looking to examine it myself with maybe only 3 or 4 people in that entire chapel. It's an amazing feeling. And while there, I kept noticing stuff. I said, well, wait a minute. The official guidebook says this is Greek, but that's Hebrew. You can't mistake it. And it says this.
Is that the letters or the language you saw?
Yes, Michelangelo, he put a little trompe-l'oeil scroll. It looks like it's parchment unrolling out of the ceiling. And the guidebooks to this day from the Vatican say it's the Greek letters Alpha and Omega, which is in the book of John. John is the first one to call Jesus the beginning and the end, Alpha and Omega. That's about the year 200. And anyway, you look up, there's no Greek there. It says Aleph in Latin letters, and then the letter Ayin from the Hebrew alphabet. And there's no Greek whatsoever. And there's many things like that throughout. And there's other things, some of the Vatican literature on says, they will say, we don't know why Michelangelo did this, but this is what he did. But if you know the Jewish tradition, it's obvious why he did what he did. So I started doing research and I found out amazing, amazing secrets.
And one of the things I remember you've spoken about was the fig tree out of the book of Genesis, where it says that Adam and Eve took a lot, well, most Christians would say the apple, but I believe that you've done some research and you were thinking about the fig tree.
Yeah, it's right there. I mean, first of all, the Bible itself, you can read in any language, and it says the fruit. It doesn't specify. And there was a question 2,000 years ago, which fruit? Now, in Latin translations, the fruit that would cause the sin that brought so much evil into the world, they just thought it was in Latin male, bad. And later on, they inverted the 2 vowels and it became mela, which is apple.
Wow.
Now, the rabbis back then debated, well, what could it be? Da, 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 da. And they finally used rabbinic logic. And they said, okay, if the solution to the problem is fig leaves to cover themselves, then the problem was probably a fig tree. There's a concept that God loves us so much that God doesn't give us a problem unless he's already hidden the solution inside the problem itself. So if the problem were figs, then the solution would be fig leaves. This was unknown in the time of Michelangelo unless you studied Jewish tradition. So I was wondering how he would know this. Because you can look at all the other artworks and it's always an apple.
Yeah, which is a very good question because, that Michelangelo, we would have imagined, would have not known anything about the Jewish tradition, other than the Old Testament, he would have not had any understanding, but that's not the case at all, is it?
No, no. I found out that about 13 years old, he was unofficially adopted by the de' Medici family, who were the richest Christians in all of the Western world at that time. And Lorenzo, the head of the family at that time, Lorenzo the Magnificent, he was so fond of this little kid who had been pretty much abandoned by his family. His father gave up on him and palmed him off for 2 gold coins a year to be almost like an indentured servant. It's a Cinderella story that Lorenzo found him sleeping on straw and found that this kid could carve marble better than any adult in the world. And instead of putting in a sort of dormitory for their young artists that they were grooming, they brought him into the house. He slept in the same bed with the richest children in the Christian world, and ate at their table, wore their clothes, and even had the same private tutors. Now, when I'm talking in Italian to an Italian audience, if they're very skeptical, I love when people are skeptical because then it makes me be more specific and clear. I just named the names of his 3 private teachers in the Palazzo de' Medici. It was Poliziano, Marsilio Ficino, and Pico della Mirandola. And Italians study this in their version of high school. And they go, oh, those are his teachers? Okay, now we believe everything. Because they're known to be some of the greatest geniuses of the Florentine Renaissance. And yet they were all obsessed with the Jewish tradition. And all of them studied Hebrew, they studied Bible.
Were they Jewish themselves?
No, they were absolutely devoted Christians.
Right.
But they wanted to see, if you love something or love somebody, you want to find out everything.
So would it be right to call them, because today we have the Hebraic roots movement in Christianity and people understanding, or the Jewish roots movement, would they be something like that?
Well, it's a specific term. They were Neoplatonists. It was the Neoplatonic movement. And it was a fusion of Greek philosophy, mainly Plato, and Jewish tradition and Jewish wisdom literature, and Christianity. And they had this blending, almost a braiding together. And the Inquisition loathed this. It was anathema, and they were condemned. And they had to do things very, very hush-hush. So they had a sculpture garden of San Marco, and they said, oh, it's just for, painting things outdoors and sculpting, but they were having lessons there. They had smuggled in a wealth of texts from the east to the west at the fall of Constantinople in 1453. All of this material was brought in, and a lot of Plato that the Western world had considered lost. And Plato was not really looked well upon by the Inquisition. The Inquisition accepted Aristotle, but not Platonic thought. So, of course, they're studying Platonic thought in Florence. Florence and Rome didn't get along.
Right. So, bearing this in mind, with the Inquisition and the difficulties that Michelangelo must have been impossible almost for him to put these codes in. Didn't anybody notice? Or?
Well, that's a very good question, Martin. The thing is that back then you had so much censorship. They were watching everything. And this is what I do with my work with art history, you have to know what each kind of bird means. They all have a different message. Plants, trees, body positions, colors, position on the panel of a fresco or a painting. All of this has hidden meanings. Symbolism from Greco-Roman mythology, even in the Renaissance. Very important to know that. But the one thing that the censors didn't study was Jewish wisdom literature. And Michelangelo and several other artists from that forbidden school of Neoplatonism in Florence were using Jewish symbolism to hide their Christian messages in their artwork.
Wow.
The message, the subtitle of the book is Michelangelo's Forbidden Messages. And people saw that subtitle and they thought, oh, okay, we have two Jewish authors who are finding a way to take a slap at Christianity and the church. And it couldn't be further from the truth. His forbidden messages were all about Jewish-Christian brotherhood. I don't like the word tolerance. It's like putting up with something you really don't like. But this was really about brotherhood. And it was devoted Christians who were reveling in the joy of finding out the roots of their faith. And it sounds like something normal today. Look at what we're doing here, this conversation. This would have been illegal 500, 600 years ago under the Inquisition.
And I think that, you're watching today, and I know many of you will be interested in Jewish-Christian relations and fascinated by this. It was a bit of a pre-taste of what's happening today. And even today, it's still a movement which is still gaining ground and people are coming to know. However, a lot of people across the world are very interested, Roy. They're saying we need to know what the rabbis knew because we have the same Bible and we need to have the wisdom.
Well, I'll give you one example. You're absolutely right. I'll give you one example. One of our very first fan letters when the book came out in the United States was from an evangelical preacher in the southern states of the United States. And it was about the fig. And he said, thank you, because all my life I've wondered why Jesus curses the fig tree in the Gospels. And now I understand it's the tree that started all the troubles.
One of the things our viewers might not understand is that the Catholic theology was completely replacing the Jewish people with the church. So this was a huge, theologically speaking, a huge change of the church.
Yeah, Michelangelo was bucking this when he did his artwork for the Vatican, and he's hiding in messages saying, I don't accept this theology. It's called successionism or replacement theology. And he didn't accept it. And it was his plea for brotherhood. In the book, we say he was planting seeds, hidden seeds in the Vatican, and they're finally taking root centuries later.
So if you want to find out more of the Sistine secrets, some of more of what Roy's been talking to us today about, then do get hold of the book. They can get hold of that on Amazon. You can order the book, so order that today. I know that you'll really enjoy it, The Secrets of the Sistine Chapel, because the funny thing is, of course, there's all the movies out and with Dan Brown and those kind of finding symbols in art and the secrets that are hidden, and people are really fascinated with this kind of secrets. And
that's the work that I do now. I do a lot of art detective work, and the only difference between me and Dan Brown is the artworks I handle are actually real, the secrets are real, and so far nobody's been killed.
And just as we're finishing, one of the things that has always fascinated me is about the Vatican archives. I don't know if you've been given access to that or you've learnt about it, whether there are Jewish secrets that have been hidden in the Vatican archives, which could play a role today. Because Natalie and I have always wondered about this.
Well, that's a whole other program. But the Vatican recently digitalized and put online no less than 813 different, very important Jewish texts that they had down there. Wow. So now they're accessible to scholars all over the world just by the click of a button.
And this the Vatican archives is a bit like the Dead Sea Scrolls, because there are things that our viewers might not realize, but there are things that might be discovered that are going to revolutionize or confirm the text, and people will be able to find things out from it. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We've run out of time, Roy. It's always like that. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming in and talking about your book, The Sistine Secrets. We do hope that you'll be able to get that book. And thank you very much for joining us on the program, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Wonderful to be with you today, and today we are looking at the 22nd letter of the alphabet, and the name is Tav. It's the last one, the last letter. And his numerical value is 400, and also it represents truth and also perfection. And if you remember, we spoke about the name Ot. In Hebrew, it means letter. But it's not just letter, it could be also a sign, and it can be also a miracle. Now we look at the name, we say that it represents perfection, Tamim, and it is written in the Psalm 19, yes, the Psalm 19 verse 7 is written, the Torah of the Lord is perfect, and his Torah Yehovah Tamima, which is a beautiful thing. So Tav represents truth, Emet. As the last letter is expressed, that eventually at the end of time, truth will prevail. Falsehood may appear more attractive than truth, but for a while. But at the end of time, truth will prevail. So we shouldn't despair. We can look at the shape of Sheker that we looked already last time and Emet. And if you put both of them next to each other, you can see that the base of Emet is very level. You can see all the little legs of Aleph and Mem and Tav. But when you look at Sheker, you can see that the letters or have only one leg or is like curved and is not strong. So we can think that sometimes it's easier, falsehood is easy, is the easy path, but at the end, truth will prevail. So today we look at 4 beautiful names, Tav, which is the last letter of the alphabet. We look at Ot, which is the letter, but also a sign and a miracle. We look at the name Emet, which is the truth. And we look at the name Tamima, which means perfect. And this is the last letter of the alphabet. I hope that you really enjoy that, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed that segment. It's been great to have you, Roy in the studio. If you'd like to email us, don't forget you can email us at info@israelfirst.org. And remember, we're the program that looks at the land, the people, and the language.